popular online game World of Tanks, published and developed by Wargaming, has many tens of thousands of players and a wide variety of historical and semi-historical armored vehicles to play. It also has a few fake tanks as well. That is, tanks that never existed in either drawings or material. The Progetto M35 Model 46 medium tank is one from the latter category. The tank is very handsomely represented with a 3D model, but it's fake, as the tank never existed. However, the vehicle in-game is not wholly fabricated and has a minuscule basis, in fact. Welcome to another Tank Encyclopedia voiced article. I'm your host Wood, and today I'll be covering the Progetto M35 Model 46. If you like what we do, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single video. If you want to contribute more directly, consider donating on Patreon or PayPal. It helps us keep the lights on. In World of Tanks, the Progetto M35 Model 46 is, as might be expected from its name, represented as a project dating from 1946 for a 35-ton medium tank. There is even a short history provided. Conceptualization of a draft design developed at the request of General Francesco Rossi, who believed that only light vehicles weighing up to 35 tons would be effective in a new war. Such an innovative design was not approved. Development was discontinued when Italy joined the Standard Tank project. This history is a half-truth at best. In-game, the design is as follows. The engine for the Progetto M35 in the game is given as the 652 horsepower ID36S 6V engine. Although the manufacturer's name is not provided, the Italian firm of Isotta Fraschini did make a series of engines known as ID36. In World of Tanks, the engine module weight given is 1,200 kilograms, more than the actual engine, and the engine in-game is also much more powerful than the real equivalent. The engines have only been around since the early 1980s, although the company itself dates back to the early years of the 20th century. Whilst the engine is neither for tanks and was not available in 1946, the engine is essentially genuine. The suspension used for the Progetto M35 is open to question, with 6 evenly spaced road wheels on each side and a noticeable offset between the wheels on the left and right. It appears to be suggesting the adoption of a torsion bar suspension for the tank. No such mention of this type of suspension or any other type of suspension is mentioned by General Rossi, so this choice is entirely fictional on the part of World of Tanks. Secondly, the choice of tracks for the model is very odd too, as with 3 rectangular rubber pads across each link, the track bears an uncanny resemblance to the British hush puppy type of tracks as used on the Centurion. There is no evidence that Italy ever adopted a Centurion tank or the hush puppy tracks for it either. Those types of tracks weren't even introduced on the Centurion until the 1960s in an effort to reduce the damage to paved roads. In World of Tanks, the Progetto M35 Model 46 is shown using what is described as a 90-50 T119E1 main gun. This is a 50 caliber long 90mm gun with a cylindrical muzzle brake or blast diffuser. This gun is a very interesting choice as the history of the T119 makes it clear that this is entirely inappropriate for this design. For a start, it's American, not Italian. The T119 gun originated from the US T42 medium, which did not even reach the wooden mock-up stage until 1949. When it did, it was fitted with the M3A1 90mm gun, but this was considered not good enough and had to be improved with the revised specifications for an improved pressure breach. It was this revised 90mm which became the T119. This T119 gun was able to fire the same 90mm ammunition as the M3A1, but not the other way around because of the higher pressure. Manufacture of the T119 was not even authorized by Ordnance Technical Committee for production at Waterville Arsenal until October 20th, 1948. This gun was still considered new and experimental, hence the T designation, in January 1950, when it was modified into the T119E1 and finally became the T125 gun, as part of the development for the M56 Scorpion. The gun on the Progetto M35 Model 46 is definitely a real gun, but it was neither Italian nor in existence at the time of this vehicle. This is before even taking into account considerations of when a brand new and experimental American tank gun could even have gotten into Italy, let alone an auto-loading version. Other points to consider are the armor. Data given by World of Tanks states that the hull armor is supposed to be 60mm on the front, 30mm on the side and the rear, and 80mm, 60mm, and 25mm on the turret front, sides, and rear, respectively. These figures are not based on any design, but are purely for balancing. Having dissected the tank as claimed by Wargaming, it is important to consider the man, General Francesco Rossi, claimed as the source, and what he really wrote. General Rossi is certainly a real person. Born on December 6, 1885, Rossi was a professional soldier who was lieutenant colonel by 1926. Through the 1930s, he rose through the senior ranks with appointments in Rome as chief of military transport and then as the commanding officer of various artillery regiments. By 1939, he was the commanding officer of an artillery corps and then an intendant of the Italian First Army. Through World War II, he continued his rise, going from the commander of 2nd Corps to Deputy Chief of Army General Staff in March 1941. He was made a lieutenant general in October 1942, and in March 1943, Deputy Chief of Staff to the Chief of the Supreme General Staff of the Italian Royal Army. It was here that General Rossi was to play a crucial role during the Italian armistice of September 1943. The origin for the World of Tank claim is from a book written by General Rossi published in 1946 entitled The Reconstruction of the Army. Written in 1946, this paper predates the Paris Peace Treaty of February 1947 and was outlining how a new Italian army should be organized and the sort of equipment it needed. World War II had been utterly devastating for Italy, with a large but ill-prepared and usually rather poorly led army suffering severe defeats at the hands of the British and the Americans. Germany, Italy's ally in World War II, was not a particularly gracious ally at times either, and following the armistice with the Allies in September 1943, Italy basically collapsed into a civil war, with some of the military remaining loyal to the Axis and the rest joining the Allies. This second half had suffered harsh reprisals from the Germans, who from then on had acted as an occupying power. Such a split in Italy required a lot of mending after the war. In this sense, General Rossi's short book was very well timed. The army was totally broken by the war and was still operating a few Italian vehicles left over from the war, along with a mishmash of tanks and armored cars provided by British and Americans. A total reorganization was certainly required. It is worth bearing in mind, though, that Article 54 of the Paris Treaty of February 1947 strictly limited the Italian military to not more than 200 heavy and medium tanks, and through Article 61, a total of 250,000 army personnel. The likelihood of authorizing the expensive and time-consuming development of a homegrown tank by Italy was simply neither likely nor realistic. It's hard to imagine that General Rossi, from his senior position in the Italian military, would not have been aware of the state of the Italian economy and military post-war. Despite the obviously weakened state of the Italian economy in 1946, General Rossi was still hoping, perhaps vainly, for a new nationally produced tank, at least to the level of the production of a prototype. To this end, he outlined the few features it should have. Firstly, powered by a fuel-injected diesel engine producing between 500 and 600 horsepower. The vehicle had to be quick, able to keep up with the most advanced foreign tanks. Quite how much General Rossi might have known about the most modern tanks in Britain, America, and Russia, though, is questionable. But he would certainly have been familiar with at least World War II designs. Weight-wise, Rossi was very clear, a tank between 30 and 35 tons in weight and of sufficiently modest dimensions to be transported by rail. Armor-wise, the tank was supposed to be well-armored, yet not too large. Hardly a thorough description, but then that is because this was not a design, it was just a concept. At 35 tons, this would still be heavier than the heaviest tank Italy produced during the war, the 26-ton P-2640, and around 10 tons lighter than the German Panther. The weight range given actually closely matches that of the American M4 Sherman. This is not the only similarity either. The gun called for by General Rossi was 75mm or thereabouts. The British Cromwell was using a QF 75mm gun, the American M4 used the M3 75mm gun or the M1A1, the British Comet had the 77mm HV, whilst the German Panther used the 75mm KWK-42. Which of these, if any, General Rossi might have been considering is not known. Perhaps he was considering just an Italian gun in that caliber range, but he was clear on what was considered a suitable caliber, 75mm or thereabouts. Bigger guns, like a 90mm piece, were destined to be on a tank destroyer, preferably based on the same chassis. That, then, is literally it. There is no design, no model or plans, and not a lot of specifics. This was 1946, too, so options were very limited for Italy. General Rossi might have wished for a new tank to be produced in Italy, It would, after all, be very good for Italian industrial rebuilding as well as an independent army. But in 1946, this was wishful thinking. World of Tanks' such an innovative design claim is simply false. There is no design, and none of the features he mentioned were in any way innovative. There is also no need at all for a new and expensive tank for Italy, especially a tank which, after all, would offer nothing that existing available and cheaper designs did not already offer. By the end of the 1940s, the Italian army had tanks and tank destroyers which matched what General Rossi had been calling for in the form of Sherman tanks of various types armed with 75, 76, and 105mm guns, Sherman Fireflies armed with 17-pounders, and the Americans supplied M36 Jacksons as tank destroyers with 90mm guns. A tank destroyer based on the chassis of a Sherman tank, just as General Rossi had wanted back in 1946. The Progetto M35 Model 46 is a fake. Not a completely made-up-from-nothing fake, but without a doubt still a fake. The call from General Rossi for a new tank made it clear that the 90mm gun was not for this tank, but for a completely different vehicle. Not only that, but the 90mm gun selected by World of Tank was just not possible to be fitted to a tank in 1946, let alone one in Italy. The tracks, assuming they are hush-puppy tracks, are neither Italian nor available in 1946. The engine certainly is a real thing, but it was not used in tanks, and it was not around in 1946. All this predated the attempts to develop a single tank as a standard panzer, sometimes known as the Europanzer project. Whatever General Rossi might have been considering as a tank is unclear, but certainly what he wrote cannot be described as a design. The vehicle as represented in World of Tanks is simply not possible and purely invented. This concludes our look at this peculiar case. If you like what we do and want to see more, remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on a single video. If you want to contribute more directly, consider donating on Patreon or PayPal. It helps keep the lights on and allows us to improve the quality of our videos. Until next time, keep us in your sights.